Watercolor is not an easy medium. It requires mastery of the techniques that only practice and experience will provide. Good tools and materials will make a difference for sure, but without an understanding of the role of water, you are unlikely to achieve the transparency and the luminosity that you are seeking in your finished painting. Think of water as a vehicle that will transport your watercolor pigments to where you want them to go, like the fuel in your car. No gas, you're not going to get very far. The three techniques in using water effectively that I urge you to master are dry on dry, wet on dry, and wet on wet. So let's take a look at some examples. First one, dry on dry. This is only good for small areas, but you would not want to paint a 12 by 14 inch background using this technique. The result will be a smeary, streaky texture. But it does have some uses, and we will get into those in another video. The second one is wet on dry. So for this we're going to mix up a nice juicy wash on your palette. And load your brush up well with this wash and apply the wash in a back and forth stroke. Can you see the difference? And now we're going to check out the wet on wet. So first, wet the area on your paper with clean water. Again, charge the brush from the puddle and note the difference. It's a paler wash, pigment mixing with the water on the paper, but it gives you beautiful soft edges. So why don't we spend some time just playing around with some of these techniques? So again, I'm going to wet the paper with clean water. You know what? I'm going to draw a line around it because it's going to make it much easier for you to see the area that I've wet. And wet it again. Get it really wet. This time I'm going to use a stronger wash. I'm going to add a bit more pigment to it. And let's try applying this wash in a left to right repeated stroke. Look how the wash is running into the wet areas. You can manipulate the edges with a clean, dry, damp brush. What happens when you apply a second color to the edge of the first color? See the nice soft blending that occurs? And then we can add a third color. This is pretty much the technique that I use throughout the demonstration of the painting. Okay, so now let's try another test. This time we're going to do wet on dry. And I'm going to use a lot of wash. The brush is fully charged with the wash. Let's leave the swatch to dry just for just barely a minute. Experiment with dabbing on some wet pigment and another dabbing of clean water. Remove the pigment and just notice the result. But if you go back to the previous swatch, you see it's really dry and very hard to remove any pigment. As a matter of fact, you could put another wash right over it, nothing is going to move underneath. You may notice some dry, harder lines forming around these two dabs of water. That's called blooming, and it's not very pronounced in this case. Okay, let's do another swatch. This time we're going to apply 2 washes wet on dry. And leave to dry for a short time. Now with a clean, dry brush, we're going to remove the pigment. You can do this while the swatch is still wet enough. Experience and practice will teach you how to time it. If the wash is still a bit damp, we can remove the pigment underneath by either lifting or dabbing some water onto it. However, if it becomes too dry, you won't be able to remove the pigment. Okay, another swatch. This time we're going to do wet on wet with a lot more water and a wetter wash on the brush. So take a note of the difference. There's a bead of wash forming on the side of the swatch and running down. puddle of excess wash is forming at the bottom. Again, we're going to do another swatch, and this time we're going to dry them with the dryer. Now that they're really dry, with a damp brush, I'm going to try to soften the line where the two colors meet. Not too bad, but not great. So now I'm going to show you how I will paint a leaf wet into wet. So first I'm going to put the pigment down on dry paper. And while it's still wet, I'm going to just dab in a darker color for the shadow. And now I'm going to leave it alone. However, I do want to remove a little vein in the middle of the leaf, and I'm going to let the leaf swatch dry a little bit. While that's happening, I'm going back to the first swatch on this line, and I'm going to just apply a wash of the same colors. I haven't added any more pigment. I'm just showing how by glazing the same pigments on top of the previous pigments, it will just get a little bit darker. This gives you a lot of control in your values. Okay, so back to the leaf. It's dried a little bit, but it's still damp enough, and I'm using a smaller brush with a good fine tip, and it's just barely damp. And there I go. I've just removed the vein in the middle of it. So you should practice this. Do it over and over again until you build up the control that you need. So to recap all of this and to take a good look again at the effect of water, I'm going to do a series of swatches, starting with dry to increasing the amount of water in the wash, and then a second line of swatches starting off with a very pale wash and adding more and more pigment as we work our way down. So the last little thing that I want to show you is the difference between different brushes. So I'm going to lay down a wash with a small round brush on wet paper, and then I'm going to lay down a wash with a mop on dry paper, and you're going to see the difference. With the mop, I don't have to dry the paper. It will hold a huge amount of wash and pigment. So it's maybe something that you might want to consider picking up. Okay, so are we ready to start painting? I'm using 100% cotton, 140 pounds, and I'm going to start off with just doing a rough sketch of the composition that we're going to paint. Not going to be putting in any details at this stage. A few mountains behind. And a little bit of foreground. And that's it. So we're going to start off by wetting the entire sheet of paper. The bigger the brush you have, the better. I could actually do with a bigger brush. What you want to do is sort of angle your head as you're looking at the paper so that the lighting will show you if you've missed any areas that are still dry. Make sure it's good and wet. And we're going to let that water start sinking into the paper. See, I'm not shy with the water at all. Okay, so here's my palette. Basic colors: ultramarine blue, new gamboge, yellow ochre, and I'm going to mix up new gamboge with red to give me a bit of an orange. So first thing I'm putting in is the sky. Wet on wet. Adding more water so that the colors become paler. And I'm going right over the trees. Now with a little bit of yellow, just warming up the bottom of the sky a bit. Tilting to help the water flow down. Okay, so I'm going to mix up sort of purpley gray with the red, a little bit of yellow, and the blue. And wet into the wet. Work quickly because you don't want any hard edges here at all. Just going to paint around the trees and simulate where I want the mountains to be at the back. Excuse me. And vary the colors as you go. You know, a bit more blue, a bit more brown, a bit more yellow. It adds interest. Okay, so I'm going to mix the green. Get that down. Again, everything is fusing and blending together, wet on wet. I'm going to very roughly just wash in where the trees are going to be. You practice using different brush strokes that will give you the kind of texture that simulates trees with leaves, but you don't want to get into, you know, all the little details of painting each and every leaf. Just squint as you're doing it. And just get the soft washes in, let them blend together. And just dab, 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 dab to add a little darker line here. You don't have to smoothen it out with the brush. The water is going to do that for you. And for interest, doesn't have to be realistic. I'm going to brighten up just behind the trees, the bottom of the mountains. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Not bad. Okay. The first layer is done. And it's still working. It's still fusing and washing into each other. Just leave it alone. When it's perfectly dry, and you can use a hairdryer to speed it along, you're now ready to start the second wash. Again, clean water. This time I'm using a mop, a big mop. I think this is a Raphael. And I'm just going over everything with water, again like we did in the beginning. Now I'm cutting around the trees a little bit more because I do want the trees to be a bit more distinctive. I don't want them on this wash to fuse as much as they did before. And I'm going to mix up a bluish gray to simulate some clouds. I'm actually tilting the paper more vertically so that it helps the pigment to run down. I'm holding the block of paper in my left hand brightening up the top, a bit more blue. And I'm going to soften the edges. And if necessary, remove some of the pigment that might be running down too much. That's pretty good. Now let's go over the yellow. Whoops, there's too much there. Get rid of it. Go around the trees. Brighten the top of the distant hills there at the bottom of the sky. Soften it up. Notice as I'm working, those clouds are still blending and softening up, and that's what you want. So we're going to go over the distant hills. Look at those beautiful colors working together. You see how nicely the mop works? I mean, it really holds a ton of water. So I'm going to go over the foreground green, brighten that up. And get in the habit of mixing your own greens if you can. And as you paint, vary the colors a little bit more yellow here, a little bit more blue there. It adds good interest. There you go. Let's make that a little bit darker. And we're going to strengthen the patch of orange. And that is starting to look quite nice. We have to do something between the trees. Make sure you squint, move your head back and squint as you look at your painting in progress, and that will guide you quite a bit so that you don't get tunnel vision and focus on only one area at a time. Yeah, we definitely have to darken between the trees here, otherwise they disappear into each other. Oops, see what happens? Not a problem. Turn it into a shadow. That actually worked out very well. So if you don't want one color to run into another, you have to wait and get it dry. So we're pretty much done now for our second layer of washes. So I'm going to work on the trees. And I'm still using a mop, but a smaller one this time. And here you're going to develop your own technique for simulating the irregularities of the leaves on a small tree like this. Practice and practice and practice. Now where you want a distinct line, you work on the dry surface. Where you want the colors to blend into each other, you go into a wet surface, just like here. See how the yellow is fusing with the green that I just put down. We've got to get in some shadow areas. Just added a bit more blue, touch of red to darken the green. Again, to the right it's dry, to the left it's wet. So our little dabs on the right are staying put, they're not blending, but where the pigment touches the wet area, it will blend. There you go. And we want our darkest value to go on now. So we've painted the trees in basically, what, 1, 2, 3, 4 values. And this is where you fall in love with watercolor. Look at the beautiful blending, as well as the distinctive marks. Just depends on the amount of water that you have in your wash and on the paper. Notice I'm dabbing, not brushing so much. I think we just are ready now to let this start to dry, and we will get in some details. For the details, you want to move down to a smaller brush with a good point, and let's put in some little distant trees here. Now obviously I'm working on the dry paper, And again, squint so that you see the overall painting, and you'll get a good idea of where to paint, when to stop. We have to make in here a little bit darker again. And some detailing to get a little texture on the trees to simulate some leaves. Now here, a little goes a long way. Don't overdo this. And it's these dark final details that will bring the whole painting to life. So I'm mixing up some sepia or a dark brown with a bit of the blue, still keeping it fluid enough that it will move on the paper, and I'm going to get in some branches. Sorry you can't see what I'm doing. I'm hiding it with my hand, but you'll see in a minute. There you go. Again, don't go too far with this. Just a few details. And don't make continuous lines, because in a tree the branches will always start disappearing behind the leaves and they will reappear. So, like that. That's about enough. Maybe one over here. I always go too far. I need a big red button on the wall saying stop. Oh, we're almost done. You know, I could keep going and start working on fence posts and all sorts of stuff, but that's nice. Leave it like that, and thanks for watching.